A front line can change without a single tank breaking through. It only takes one pair of eyes on high ground and one set of coordinates moving faster than fear. In this footage, the real weapon is not the mortar tube, and it is not the drone. The real weapon is the clock, because the war now punishes seconds, not just mistakes. A small Ukrainian unit tries to slip away, and it looks routine from the ground. From above, it looks like a target list being written in real time. The first impacts do not just hit dirt, because they hit confidence, rhythm, and the idea that cover will hold. Then the battlefield flips, and the side under pressure finds a way to stare back through the smoke. What follows is a chain of strikes that feels unreal, because safe spaces start acting like traps. A field becomes a warehouse becomes a coffin, and one open hatch becomes an invitation. This is not a story about hero shots, because it is about how modern war turns tiny openings into total losses. Stay with Military Force, hit like, and subscribe for clear, grounded battlefield analysis you can trust. Now watch how one watched movement triggers a sequence that forces an entire area to reset. Russia's advantage here starts before any round is fired, because high ground turns a quiet sector into a live feed. From a raised observation point, Russian spotters can scan tree lines, road cuts, and the edge of trenches, and they do it the way modern armies do it, as a routine rhythm of watch, mark, and report. That elevation matters because it removes blind spots that protect movement at ground level, and it lets small signs stand out, like a vehicle door opening, a cluster of figures, or a short burst of activity near a storage spot. In this kind of fight, the first strike is often just a clean set of coordinates moving down the chain. That is where the pressure begins to build. Ukraine's move looks simple from inside the position because a small unit is trying to leave in a controlled way. The decision to disengage is already made, so the focus shifts to speed and order, and that means grabbing personal gear, pulling extra items out of cover, and recovering stored ammunition that cannot be left behind. Those tasks create patterns even disciplined soldiers cannot fully hide, because hands, bodies, and equipment must cross open gaps, and tracks and fresh disturbance appear where there was stillness. A safe moment can be the most exposed moment, not because it is noisy, but because it is visible. That visibility becomes the hinge the enemy can seize, because it turns routine behavior into a clear cue. The Russian process is blunt and efficient, because it is built to move from detection to confirmation to impact with as little delay as possible. Once the lookout confirms the activity is real and not a decoy, the location is passed to a nearby mortar team, and that team does not need line of sight to begin work. Mortars are built for this kind of engagement because the crew can adjust by map reference and correction, and they can put rounds into an area fast once the tubes are set. Even a short delay in movement can be enough, because the target is not a single person, it is the small space where the unit is forced to operate. That is how the fight moves from watching to hitting. This is also why a disciplined pullback can still get exposed, because order creates predictability. A unit that stays calm will choose the same practical steps almost every time, like packing, lifting, stacking, and moving along the most usable path, and those choices reduce chaos but also reduce randomness. From high ground, predictability is useful because it makes the scene easier to read, and it helps separate a real withdrawal from harmless background motion. The problem is not courage, and it is not training, because the problem is that the action itself must happen somewhere. Once that somewhere is confirmed, the mortar crew is already in the correct job. That sets up the impact phase. What makes this system dangerous is the speed of the handoff, because the chain is short and each link knows its role. The spotter's job is not to win the fight alone, it is to keep the field measured so the firing team can act with confidence. The mortar crew's job is not to chase a perfect shot. It is to deliver quick pressure that forces soldiers to freeze, scatter, or take cover, which slows any clean exit. And once movement slows, new information appears, like fresh routes, exposed caches, and stress decisions, and that can feed another correction and another round. This is why high ground plus indirect fire can shape a sector without taking a meter of land. And that is exactly where the story turns from withdrawal to consequence. The first mortar round does not have to hit the vehicle to change everything, because landing near an ammo point can turn one blast into many. In this case, the round falls close, and the immediate damage is not a clean kill because the detonation happens beside the ammunition the soldiers are trying to recover. That detail matters because a near miss can still strike the most fragile thing on the site, which is stored explosives sitting still. The ground shock and fragments hit the area, and the unit loses its freedom to move in the open for even a few seconds. A withdrawal that was planned as controlled suddenly becomes a scramble for cover, and that is exactly what indirect fire is meant to force. So the fight shifts from moving out to surviving the first impact. The second danger comes from what the blast touches, because ammunition behaves like a trap when it is stacked and exposed. When the first explosion kicks the cache, secondary detonations can follow, and those secondary pops can throw debris farther than the original burst. Pressure waves also travel into small gaps and shallow cover, so even soldiers who are not hit directly still get pinned by concussion and flying pieces. At least one Ukrainian soldier is wounded in the chaos, and that injury becomes a problem the unit must solve while rounds may still be coming. Now there is a hard choice between dragging a wounded man, securing gear, and keeping heads down, and each choice costs time. That is how one round can steal the tempo without destroying the main target. This is where mortars show both their strength and their limit, because they punish areas, not single moving bodies. A mortar crew can land a damaging shot fast, but the result is often partial unless the target stays inside the beaten zone. If the vehicle is still able to move, or if the soldiers find a protected pocket, the strike becomes disruption instead of elimination. That is not failure in the tactical sense because disruption can still break plans, but it is not the same as a confirmed kill. And when the enemy realizes the job is unfinished, the situation becomes a race between reloading speed and escape speed. That race is the core drama that indirect fire creates. The Russian mortar team reacts the way trained crews do, because once the first round lands, the instinct is to correct and fire again. They reload immediately to finish the job, since a follow-up strike is the best chance to catch soldiers while they are still stunned and clustered. But the same blast that pins the target also pushes it to disperse, and dispersion is the natural enemy of a second shot. If the unit breaks into smaller groups and uses terrain to mask movement, the crew is firing into a shrinking window. So the mortar team must balance speed with accuracy, and any delay gives the defenders a path out. That pressure sets up the next phase of the engagement. The key lesson is that indirect fire can be terrifying and still fail to lock the outcome, because it depends on timing and target behavior. Mortars are deadly when they trap a force in a predictable space, yet they lose certainty once the target slips behind cover or moves off the mark. A near hit near ammunition proves how fast damage can spread, but it also shows the weakness of relying on area effect to end a fight. If the first strike does not kill, the attacker must either keep the zone under fire or accept that the target may survive and adapt. And when survival is possible, the defenders start looking for the moment to strike back. Ukraine's countermove begins the moment Russian fire fixes attention on one spot, because pressure on one point can open vision somewhere else. Part of the unit is forced into evacuation work, dragging wounded men and pulling people out of the blast area. But another element stays in the trench line and reads the pattern. If the incoming rounds keep landing on the withdrawal area, then the enemy is committed, and that commitment usually means the firing team is exposed somewhere nearby. That is the quiet discipline that matters, because it turns survival into observation instead of panic. And once observation returns, the fight stops being one-sided. Ukraine's reconnaissance then finds the real prize, because fire teams often need a forward stash to keep shooting. Just beyond the mortar position, a Russian staging area appears in the open, with mortar rounds, explosives, and anti-tank mines stacked together, and a vehicle nearby to move that load. That layout signals confidence, as if the site is assumed to be out of reach, or at least out of danger for long enough to be worth the risk. But modern battlefields punish good enough security because drones erase distance when the sky is clear. So the discovery is not just tactical, it is structural, because it reveals the support chain behind the tubes. Russia keeps firing without realizing it is being watched, and that is a common failure in a drone-heavy war. A crew can feel safe because it is working fast, because it has cover from direct fire, or because it believes the opponent is too busy dealing with casualties to respond. That belief is deadly, because the opposing side does not need to win a gunfight to punish the position. All it needs is an eye in the air, a steady feed, and a team ready to launch. When a firing unit stays focused on its own target zone, it can miss the fact that the battlefield has widened behind it. And that widening is where the counterstrike is born. The FPV strike only becomes possible because the reconnaissance feed turns the target from a guess into a pinned point. With real-time video, the operator does not fly blind, and the drone is guided by precise directions instead of hope. That guidance is the difference between hitting dirt and hitting the stack, because a few meters matter when the goal is to trigger a chain reaction. The FPV comes in low, lines up on the exposed stockpile, and commits to impact, because the best armor here is speed and accuracy. This is not a slow hunt for a single soldier. It is a direct hit against stored energy sitting in one place. And once the drone closes, the outcome becomes hard to stop. The explosion that follows is not just one blast because stacked munitions can turn into a rolling detonation. Mortar rounds cook off, mines ignite, and the vehicle used to transport the load is destroyed in the same sequence, which amplifies the damage and spreads it across the site. Even without counting numbers, the effect is obvious. A local fire support node is crippled, and the firing crew loses the confidence to stay in position. This is why striking logistics can beat striking manpower in short windows, because one depot can remove many future shots. It also forces a sudden reset, since crews must either pull back, relocate, or accept they are now inside a watched box. And once that box closes, the battle shifts again, from surviving incoming fire to exploiting the enemy's scramble. Russia's armor in this segment is not part of a sweeping breakthrough, because the pattern has shifted towards small, flexible pushes that try to slip through gaps. Large mechanized assaults often get shredded before they reach the line, so Russian units increasingly send smaller groups and isolated vehicles, hoping one platform can get close enough to force a reaction. Sometimes that gamble works for a few minutes, and those minutes can still be dangerous, since a single armored vehicle near a trench can pin defenders and disturb a planned movement. That is the space this vehicle enters, not to take ground permanently, but to create pressure and confusion. And pressure is sometimes all an attacker needs to open the door for follow-on action. The armored vehicle advances dangerously close and begins suppressive fire, but the key detail is that much of it is blind. Trees, broken terrain, and limited visibility block clear sightlines, so the crew fires into likely positions, betting that volume will do the job. This kind of shooting is not meant to score a clean hit. It is meant to make defenders keep their heads down and delay decisions. If the defenders hesitate, they may get trapped in place, and if they bolt too fast, they may expose themselves to other threats. So even rough fire can shape behavior, which is why these vehicles still matter in a drone-heavy battlefield. But this tactic also carries a weakness, because blind suppression cannot confirm results. Ukraine's response is not dramatic, because it is disciplined and quiet. The soldiers assess the situation fast, and they do not treat the vehicle as a duel they must win immediately. They also recognize the risk problem, because if there is no solid fallback fortification and time is short, staying to trade shots can cost more than it gains. So they choose a controlled withdrawal, staying low, reducing exposure, and avoiding any movement that would give the vehicle an easy target. Then they do something more important than firing back. They report the vehicle's presence to command, which turns a local threat into a planned engagement. That shift is the real counter, because it moves the fight from emotion to process. Once the vehicle stops firing and begins repositioning, the Ukrainian side does not lose contact, because a reconnaissance drone keeps eyes on it. persistent observation is the modern substitute for chasing with infantry, since it saves lives and keeps the target inside a visible box. As the armored vehicle moves, the drone tracks it continuously, marking turns, pauses, and the moment it tries to break line of sight. The crew pulls into a partially destroyed hangar by the roadside and uses it as temporary shelter, which is a classic move in older wars. But older cover assumes the enemy must see with human eyes, and that assumption collapses when the sky stays open. So the hangar becomes a reference point, not a hiding place. This is why withdrawing at the right time can be an indirect attack, because it preserves force while the enemy exposes its route and habits. Ukraine does not have to gamble on a close-range exchange because the drone provides continuity, and continuity creates options. A tracked vehicle cannot easily disappear, since its size, path, and stops tell a story even when it is behind walls. And once a target is held under watch, commanders can choose the best tool and the best moment, instead of taking the first shot available. That is how a few minutes of blind suppression ends up producing a locked target file. And with that file in hand, the next phase is no longer about escape, it is about precision. This final phase proves the edge is not one weapon, because it is a loop that goes from tracking to disabling to finishing, and it repeats across targets. The hangar strike shows the loop at its sharpest. A Russian armored vehicle pulls into a damaged roadside hangar, but one open hatch turns armor into a doorway. Ukraine sends a fiber optic guided FPV, and that matters because it does not depend on a radio link that can be jammed. The pilot flies slow, manages the cable, and keeps a clear feed while closing in. The drone slides through the hatch and detonates inside, and reconnaissance confirms the vehicle is fully destroyed. That single sequence explains why cover is no longer the same thing as safety, which leads straight to the wider pattern. Across other sectors, FPV teams apply a simple rule to armor. Stop it first, then erase it. The first strike is aimed to disable mobility, so the vehicle cannot reach better shelter or slip out of view. Then a second drone follows, and the goal is to ignite the ammunition space or burn the hull until repair is no longer realistic. This two-step method turns damage into a confirmed loss, and it also drains the enemy's ability to recycle wrecks. That denial effect is why the same logic is pushed against bigger systems. Rocket artillery is where the loop becomes strategic, because MLRS launchers are high value and thin-skinned once found. In one scene, a launcher has already fired and is withdrawing, but an FPV intercepts it mid-movement and a single hit is enough. In another scene, a newly deployed launcher is detected before it can fire, and the strike arrives first. Stored rockets amplify the impact into secondary explosions, and the system dies without launching a single rocket. Each launcher lost means fewer salvos, fewer fast relocations, and less pressure on trenches and rear roads. That is how a small drone can remove a large threat, which then connects to how habits get punished. A Grad or BM-21 is located by a Mavic-type drone because the firing point is familiar and the search is fast. Coordinates are passed up, Ukrainian long-range fire hits, and rockets and fuel cook off into more blasts. The launcher becomes burning wreckage, and the message is simple: repeat a sight and it becomes a trap. Air defense is pulled into the same problem because a missile launch can reveal the system that fired it. A book engages a Ukrainian drone and narrowly misses, but the launch exposes the operating area. Ukraine answers quickly. The first strike damages the system, and a second hit detonates stored ammunition and finishes it completely. Removing air defense widens freedom for reconnaissance, which makes the next set of strikes easier to build. The sequence closes by showing the human end of the loop. A short raid in the Lyman direction is fast and controlled, and the team disappears back into cover before the enemy can react. Then the camera cuts to men running across open ground, and FPV drones track them until there is nowhere left to hide. This is how attempts to approach the line collapse inside a watched zone. And when the low sky stays controlled, movement itself becomes the battlefield, for both sides, every day. Control in modern war is no longer just about holding ground, because it is about controlling movement and controlling resupply at the same time. Russia starts with the classic advantage of high observation and fast mortar fire. Yet one exposed forward stockpile is enough to break a local fire plant in minutes. That is the real warning here, since a battlefield that looks stable can still collapse when logistics gets hit and crews lose the confidence to stay in place. The new factor is fiber optic FPV, because it reduces the value of jamming and makes hiding less reliable, especially when a crew leaves a hatch open or settles into weak cover. If the disable then finish routine keeps spreading to MLRS and air defense, every relocation becomes a gamble, since one tracked move can cost more than a full day of firing can achieve. The realistic forecast is a faster race in reconnaissance and counter-recon, and the side that shrinks the time from detection to impact will set the tempo for the next phase. Subscribe to Military Force for clear, grounded battlefield analysis you can trust, and stay with the channel for the next update.